Today is Wednesday of Holy Week and what many refer to as Spy Wednesday. Now, you might be asking, what on earth is Spy Wednesday? Well, I'm glad you asked. Today gets its name because this is the day in which biblical scholars believe that Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, betrayed Jesus and handed him over to the chief priests of that day for a sum of 30 pieces of silver. And since Judas was thought to be sneaky or conniving, his actions then conjured up this image of a spy, hence the name Spy Wednesday. But why on earth would we spend time today remembering Judas during Holy Week? Well, my hope is to unpack that together. So let's begin by reading from Luke's Gospel, chapter 22, beginning in verse 1. It says, "The festival of unleavened bread, which is called Passover, was drawing near. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put him to death because they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas called Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. He went away and discussed with the chief priests and temple police how he could hand him over to them. They were glad and agreed to give him silver. So he accepted the offer and started looking for a good opportunity to betray him to them when the crowd was not present." Okay, so a straightforward reading of this text tells us a lot of different information. One, that the day was prior to Passover. Well, okay, what's Passover? Passover was the day that the Jewish faithful would commemorate the redemption of their people out of slavery in Egypt. We also know that the religious authorities of that day were working hard to find a way to get rid of Jesus. Why? Well, because they were worried about the people who were listening and were following the teachings of Jesus. And they didn't want an uprising, so they were hoping to capture him in silence. We know also that Judas is one of the original 12 disciples, part of his inner circle. And we also know that Judas worked out a deal and agreed to hand over Jesus for a price, 30 pieces of silver to be exact. Now, I don't know about you, but could you imagine one of your closest friends or family members selling you out for some extra cash? I know, maybe you can think of a couple, but I want you to seriously consider a close personal friend of yours, a person you spent days, months, even years serving alongside them and encouraging them and teaching them a new way to be human, showing them what unconditional love really looks like. They then decide after all that to sell you out and turn you into the religious authorities for a few bucks. 30 pieces of silver to be exact, according to Matthew's account. And in the book of Exodus, we discover that 30 pieces of silver was the typical or going rate to purchase a slave. Now, maybe this information speaks to how Judas or even the religious authorities valued or didn't value Jesus. I'm not sure, but I don't believe the amount is as important as the fact that Judas would consider any amount acceptable. Jesus was a friend to Judas. He put unconditional love on display for him to see every single day. Jesus was literally willing to lay down his life for Judas. How could you put a price on that? Well, I think the simple answer is greed. Greed is one of those sins where we're not too embarrassed, to admit that we all struggle with. If I asked you to raise your hand if you struggled with lustful temptations, everyone's looking around like, I ain't raising my hand. But if I ask you, how many of you struggle with greed? Well, then we're like, oh yeah, totally. Who doesn't? As you study the ministry of Jesus, you discover that Judas was chosen to handle the treasury for the disciples, for Jesus' ministry. He was the money person. He was responsible for making sure that all their financials were in order. So on one hand, it makes sense that Judas would struggle with greed, but on the other hand, how far gone would he have to be to completely sacrifice everything he had with Jesus for 30 pieces of silver? Now, I think it's really easy to read this text and wag our fingers and shake our heads at Judas the betrayer, but honestly, I can't stand in a place of judgment, because how many times have I betrayed him? By my choices, by my words, or my actions. Judas wasn't the only disciple who turned his back on Jesus during this time. I mean, Peter could have easily been known as Peter the betrayer. I mean, almost every one of his followers abandoned him, and the difficult truth is, we are no less prone to do so ourselves. I mean, it's bad enough that Judas valued money over his relationship with Jesus. But what's more devastating, I think, is the reality that he never grasped the true power of Christ's love and his forgiveness. See, Spy Wednesday isn't about remembering Judas as much as it is remembering how often we can find ourselves turning away from the love of Jesus and placing it on something or someone else. Jesus knows. He knows we betray him with our thoughts and our words and our choices and our actions. He sees through all of that, and yet he still loves us. He offers us forgiveness, always. And he did that with all of his followers, faithful or not. And he does that with us today. Despite our past, Jesus offers us friendship, and he offers us love in our lowest moments, in hopes that we might become the people that he's called us to be. I'm certain this is something for all of us to remember, but I want to ask this. Who in your life needs to know that they are loved today? Who in your life needs to hear your voice say to them, I love you, and there's nothing in this world that would make me love you any less? Nothing. I encourage you to do that today and extend the love of Christ to them as Jesus has done with you and with me.